Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Sunnah TV. 7 words in this surah have never appeared anywhere else in the Quran. Not repeated, not echoed, not borrowed from an earlier revelation or returned to in a later one. 7 words that exist only here in these 9 verses, as if Allah created them for this single moment and then sealed the mold. Scholars of the Arabic language have spent centuries studying what the Quran did to their language, how it expanded it, how it bent it, how it made it do things it had never done before. But when they arrived at Surah Al-Humazah, they found something different. They found a surah where nearly every verse contains a word or a structure that Arabic had never seen. Not in the poetry of Imru al-Qais, not in the orations of Qus ibn Sa'idah, not in the war chants or the love ballads or the marketplace boasts of any Arab who had ever spoken before the Quran descended. 33 words, and inside them a linguistic event so unprecedented that one scholar counted at least 60 new features the Quran introduced to the Arabic language in this surah alone. 60. In 33 words. But the most extraordinary thing about this surah is not what it said, it is what it did. Because when Allah said al-Hutamah, He was not describing a fire that already existed. He was building one. And to understand why God Himself needed to invent new words to address what was happening in Makkah, you have to understand the moment when human language failed and divine language had to take its place. There is a limitation to human speech that most people never think about because they have never run into it. Language, in its ordinary form, describes things that already exist. A poet sees a sunset and finds words for it. A merchant names a product so others can trade it. A mother gives her child a word for pain so the child can say where it hurts. Language is a response. Something happens first, and then words arrive to capture it. This is how every language on earth operates. This is how Arabic operated for centuries before the Quran. The poets of pre-Islamic Arabia were masters of this. They had perfected the art of describing what they could see, touch, feel, and remember. They could describe a horse mid-gallop with such precision that you could hear the hooves. They could describe heartbreak with such accuracy that grown men wept in public. They could describe war with such vividness that the listener smelled iron and dust. The Arabic language, by the time the Quran arrived, was not primitive. It was one of the most expressive, nuanced, and structurally sophisticated languages on the planet. It had been polished by generations of poets who competed at the highest level, who hung their greatest works on the walls of the Kaaba itself, who treated language not as a tool, but as an art form so sacred that it defined their civilization. And it was not enough. It was not enough because there are realities that human experience cannot generate. No poet, no matter how gifted, can describe a fire he has never seen. No orator, no matter how eloquent, can name a punishment that exists beyond the borders of human imagination. No language born from human observation can contain truths that originate from outside the observable universe. And this is precisely the wall that the Quran ran into, not as a limitation but as a mission. When it descended to address a specific kind of man, doing a specific kind of damage in the streets and courtyards of 7th century Makkah, the damage itself was visible. The Quraysh elite, men such as Walid ibn al-Mughira, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, al-Akhnas ibn Shuraik, had turned the demolition of human dignity into a social institution. The scholars of Tafsir recorded different names when identifying who the surah was revealed about, but they converged on a shared conclusion. It does not matter which man. What matters is the method. A method that operated through whispered insults, calculated gestures, a raised eyebrow in a gathering that communicated to everyone present that the person being looked at was worthless. A method that combined the precision of a surgeon with the cruelty of a predator. A method so sophisticated, so layered with plausible deniability, so woven into the social fabric of Makkah that it had become invisible, the way water is invisible to a fish. The way gravity is invisible to the body that has never known its absence. Human language could condemn this behavior. Human language could say it is wrong. Human language could issue a warning and promise consequences. But human language could not do what this surah needed to do. This surah needed to not merely condemn the act, but to construct in real time, through the very syllables of its delivery, a reality that matched the crime with such architectural precision that the listener could feel the walls of consequence rising around them as the words were being spoken. The surah needed to do something that no poem, no speech, no human utterance had ever done. It needed to build with language. And that is exactly what Allah did. Not with borrowed words, not with recycled phrases, with words that had never been spoken before. Words that entered the Arabic language for the first time on the tongue of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that would never appear again anywhere else in the Quran, because they were not generic vocabulary. They were precision instruments, each one designed for this moment, this crime, this man, and this consequence. And the first of those instruments lands in the very first verse, in a form that shook the grammarians of every century that followed. Waylun likuli humazatin Lumazah, destruction for every slanderer and backbiter. The word wail had existed in Arabic before the Quran. The poets used it. But Dr. Bassam Sai, in his extensive linguistic study of this surah, tracked every appearance of wail in pre-Islamic poetry and found something remarkable. In 10 out of 13 instances, the word was attached to the word mother or father. Waylumihi, waylabi. It was an exclamation, an emotional outburst, a parent cursing fate, or a warrior damning his enemies. It was human and reactive and tied to specific moments of frustration. The Quran took that word and detached it from human emotion entirely. In this surah, wail is not an exclamation, it is a sentence. It is not a man crying out in anger. It is the creator of the universe issuing a decree. And the way the Quran attached it, not to a mother or a father, but to the preposition li, meaning for, created a grammatical structure that Arabic had rarely seen in this configuration. Wailun likuli, destruction for every. The shift is seismic. The word that poets use to curse a specific enemy in a specific battle has been promoted to a universal law. It no longer belongs to any moment. It belongs to every moment. It no longer targets one man. It targets a category of human being, wherever he exists, in whatever century he breathes. And then come the two words that define that category, Humazah, Lumazah. Neither of these words, in this exact form, appears anywhere else in the entire Quran. They are unique to this surah, minted for this occasion, and their construction tells you something that the translation cannot. Both words are built on the fu'ala pattern. Arabic grammar uses this pattern to indicate someone who performs an action with such excess, such obsessive frequency, that the action has become their identity. It is the difference between a person who tells a story and a rawiya, a person who has become storytelling itself. It is the difference between a person who knows something and an alama, a person who has become the embodiment of knowledge. When Allah used the fu'ala form for Humazah and Lumazah, He was not describing men who occasionally mocked. He was diagnosing men who had ceased to be anything other than mockery. Men whose humanity had been consumed by the act until there was nothing left underneath. The word does not describe what they do, it describes what they are. Ibn Abbas said Humazah refers to one who attacks people from behind in their absence, while Lumazah is the one who does it to their face. Mujahid reversed the definitions, saying Humazah is with the hand and the eye, the physical gesture, the wink, the pointing finger, while Lumazah is with the tongue. Abu Zayd said, one harms with the body, the other with speech. Scholars across centuries offered different configurations, and the disagreement itself is evidence of something the surah accomplishes by design. By using two words whose meanings overlap and interlock from every angle, the surah seals every possible escape route. There is no form of human degradation, whether silent or spoken, whether performed with a gesture or delivered with a sentence, whether executed in public or whispered in private, that falls outside the jurisdiction of these two words. The net is total, the coverage is complete. Whatever method you use to diminish another person, one of these two words has already found you. And here is what the grammarians could not stop discussing. The entire first verse is constructed without the definite article al-wailun, not al-wail, humazatin, not al-humazah. The scholars of Arabic, particularly al-Shawkani, noted that this seemingly small grammatical choice carries enormous weight. If the definite article were present, the verse would function as a statement of fact. The destruction is upon the slanderer, definitive, declarative. But by leaving the nouns indefinite, the verse operates simultaneously as a statement and as a prayer. Destruction is upon every slanderer, and may it be so. The absence of al transforms the verse from a description into an invocation. It is as if the verse is not merely informing the mocker of his fate, but actively calling that fate down upon him in real time as the words are being spoken. The language is not passive, it is performative. It is doing the thing it describes. And this is the first signal that this surah is not merely communicating a message, it is constructing a reality. But the construction does not stop at the first verse. The second verse introduces a connection that baffled the grammarians for a different reason entirely. And resolving that confusion requires understanding something about how the Quran thinks about the relationship between cruelty and currency. Aladhi jama'a ma'alan wa adada, the one who gathered wealth and counted it. The grammarians paused at this verse because of a problem that might seem technical but carries philosophical weight. The word aladhi, meaning the one who, is a definite relative pronoun. In standard Arabic grammar, it should follow a definite noun. But the word it follows here, humazatin Lumazah, is indefinite. The grammarians asked how this was possible. How could a definite relative clause attach itself to an indefinite antecedent? Some said Aladi was functioning as an adjective for cull. Others said it was describing Humazah directly, treating it as a known category despite its grammatical indefiniteness. Others said the sentence must be restarted entirely, with Aladi opening a new, independent statement. But the disagreement itself reveals something profound about the surah's method. By creating a grammatical joint that Arabic had no established protocol for, the Quran forces the reader to pause. It forces the mind to hold two ideas in suspension, mockery and wealth, indefinite and definite, without resolving them neatly. And in that pause, in that grammatical friction, the reader is compelled to do the work of connection themselves. The surah does not explain why mockery and wealth appear in the same breath. It places them together in a construction that is grammatically unprecedented and trusts the friction to generate understanding. The listener has to ask the question, why are these linked? And in asking, the listener begins to see. The verb adada is another word that does not appear in this form anywhere else in the Quran. It carries multiple meanings simultaneously, and the surah deploys all of them at once. He counted it again. He prepared it for future catastrophe. He treated the act of counting as ritual. He derived identity from enumeration. The word is a compressed archive of every possible relationship a human being can have with the act of measuring his own worth in coins. And it is written in a verbal form that suggests repetition and intensification. A man who does not count once, but counts continuously, obsessively, the way others might perform dhikr, except his remembrance is not of Allah. His remembrance is of his own wealth. His prayer beads are gold. His qibla is his treasury. Then comes the verse that the scholars identified as the load-bearing wall of the entire surah. Yasabu annama lahu akhlada. He thinks his wealth will make him immortal. The word akhlada does not appear anywhere else in the Quran in this exact form. It is derived from the root khalada, the same root that gives Arabic the word khulud. eternity, the word used to describe the permanence of paradise and the permanence of hellfire. By using the past tense here, the Quran performs something linguistically disorienting. The man thinks his wealth has already made him eternal, not that it will, that it has. The delusion is so complete that he experiences it as an accomplished fact. He is not hoping for permanence. He is living inside the assumption that permanence has already been granted. The past tense is not a grammatical accident. It is a window into the man's psychology, and no human author choosing words from existing vocabulary would have thought to construct that window with that particular tense. The Quran did not find this word waiting in the Arabic language. It placed it there. And then comes the word that changes everything, the word that Arabic had never heard before, the word that functions not as description but as creation. Kala layunbadhana fil Hutamah. Kala, the divine wall slams down, but the construction that follows it, layunbadhana, is itself something the Arabic language had never produced. Dr. Bassam Sai noted that this specific combination, a strong particle of negation and rebuke, followed immediately by a passive verb of emphasis and oath, does not exist in any pre-Islamic poem, any speech, any known text of Arabic before the Quran placed it here. Kala layun badana, the scholars searched for a parallel in the entirety of Arabic literature and found nothing. The structure itself is a Quranic invention, and its effect is overwhelming. It combines in two words the force of total denial, I reject everything you believe, with the force of absolute certainty, and this is what will happen to you instead, delivered in the passive voice, meaning the man who thought himself powerful enough to crush others will have no knowledge of who is throwing him, no ability to resist, no agency whatsoever. He will be thrown the way a date pit is discarded, the way a broken sandal is flung to the side of the road, and the place he will be thrown into is named with a word that entered human language at this exact moment and has never left. Al-Hutamah. Al-Hutamah did not exist as a word in Arabic before this surah spoke it into being. No poet had used it, no orator had coined it, no tribe had given this name to anything in the natural world. It arrived in the Arabic language through the mouth of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the first time in this surah, and it would never appear again anywhere else in the Quran. It is a word that was born for this single purpose and then retired, as if Allah needed one specific term for one specific reality, and, finding that human language did not contain it, authored it himself. The word is built on the root Hutamah, which means to break, to crush, to shatter something so thoroughly that the pieces no longer resemble the original. Hutamah in Arabic describes dried, dead vegetation, the kind that crumbles into dust at the slightest touch. But al-Hutamah, the form used in the surah, is on the fu'ala pattern, the same pattern as Humazah, the same pattern as Lumazah, and this is not coincidence, this is architecture. The surah has constructed a phonetic corridor, a sound tunnel that links the crime to the consequence at the level of syllable and structure. Humazah, Lumazah, Hutamah. Listen to them together. They rhyme, they share a skeletal structure, they belong to the same grammatical family. The linguistic form that described what the man did to others is the identical linguistic form that describes what will be done to him. The Arabic language itself, in the hands of its author, has become the courtroom. The grammar is the gavel, the morphology is the sentencing. And then the surah does something it has done elsewhere in the Quran, but never quite like this. وَمَا أَدْرَكَ مَا الْهُتَمَةُ. And what could possibly make you know what al-Hutamah is? This rhetorical structure, the wa-ma adraka formula, appears in other surahs. It appears with al-Qariyah, the striking hour. It appears with Sakar. It appears with al-Tariq. But the scholars noticed that every time this formula appears, it is a signal that the human mind has reached the border of its own capability. What follows cannot be understood through experience or analogy. It can only be received. And what is received here is a phrase found nowhere else in the entire Quran. Narullahil Muqada, the fire of Allah, kindled. In every other description of hellfire throughout the Quran, the fire is identified by location. Naru Jahannam, Naru Sa'ir, Naru Laza. These are terrible places with terrible names, but they are places, they exist within the created order. Here, and only here, the fire is attributed not to a place, but to Allah Himself, Narullah. The possessive construction in Arabic does not merely indicate ownership, it indicates character, it indicates essence. When the Quran says Baitullah, the house of Allah, it means not merely that Allah owns it, but that the building partakes of a sacredness that is derived from its attribution to Him. When the Quran says Nakatullah, the she-camel of Allah, it means the animal is set apart from every other animal on earth by virtue of that attribution. And when the Quran says Narullah, it means this fire is set apart from every other fire in existence, including every other fire in Jahannam, by the fact that it carries the direct signature of its creator. The word Muqada, kindled, is another word that appears only in this surah. It is an ism maf'ul, a passive participle, meaning a fire that has been kindled and remains in that state permanently. Not a fire that was lit and might go out, not a fire that burns and fades, a fire that exists in a state of perpetual kindling, as if the moment of ignition has been frozen and extended into infinity. The word does not describe a process, it describes a condition. The fire is not burning, the fire is being burned permanently. The grammar itself refuses to let the fire cool. And this permanently burning, divinely attributed fire has a target. Alati tatali u alal afida. The fire that climbs, rises, ascends with deliberate purpose over the hearts. The word tataliu is used for the rising of the sun. Not the sudden burst of an explosion, but the slow, inevitable, unstoppable ascent of light over a horizon. This fire does not erupt, it rises. It approaches the heart the way dawn approaches the sky, with a patience that is more terrifying than any violence, because patience implies intelligence, patience implies aim. Patience implies that the fire knows where it is going and is in no hurry because its target cannot move. The hearts, al-afida, the plural of fuad, the innermost heart, the seat not merely of emotion but of intention, of conviction, of the secret decisions that a person makes in the silence of their own consciousness. The decisions that no other human being can see, the decision to look at another person and rank them below you, the decision to let your wealth whisper to you that you are more, the decision to aim your tongue at someone who cannot defend themselves. Those decisions live in the fuad, and the fire is coming for them, not randomly, not as collateral damage. The fire is coming specifically for them, climbing through the body with the patience of sunrise, bypassing everything else, because the crime was committed there and the fire has been given its address. And then the surah closes the door. But the way it closes the door is the final linguistic act that seals this surah as something no human being could have authored. Innaha alayhim musada, fi amadin mumaddada, it will be sealed over them in pillars stretched forth. The scholars noted a shift in these final verses that is easy to miss, but impossible to unsee once you catch it. The entire surah, from the first verse until this point, has spoken in the singular, Humazatin, Aladhi, Yasabu, Ma'alahu, one man, one diagnosis, one crime, one sinner. But here, in the final image, the pronoun shifts to the plural, Alaihim, upon them. The door is not sealed over him, it is sealed over them. Who are they? The surah does not say, it does not give names, it does not give a number. It simply opens the frame, in the final two verses, from one man to an uncounted multitude. And this shift does something to the listener that a singular pronoun never could. It says this is not one man's story. This prison is not built for one occupant. The cell is crowded. The pillars stretch over a population, And the fact that you do not know who else is in there, the fact that the surah refuses to tell you, means you cannot be certain you are not among them. The word Musadah appears only twice in the Quran, here and in Surah Al-Balad. It comes from a root that means to shut a door, to seal a gate, to close an entrance with finality. Scholars noted that Musadah specifically implies a door, not a wall. And this distinction is not incidental, it is the architecture of a specific kind of despair. A wall offers no hope because it offers no concept of exit. A sealed door offers the concept of exit and then revokes it. Somewhere in the structure of this prison, there is an opening. The condemned can perceive it. Perhaps they can see the outline of its frame. Perhaps they can sense the space beyond it. But it is sealed. And the sealing is described as alaihim, over them, upon them, pressing down on them, as if the closure itself has weight, as if being locked in is not merely a state but a sensation, a pressure that the imprisoned feel on their bodies at all times. Fi amadin mumaddada, in pillars stretched forth. The word amad is the plural of amud, a pillar, a column, the structural element that holds a building in place. The word mumaddada means extended, stretched, prolonged beyond expectation. These pillars are not short, they are not finite. They stretch, they extend, they go on. And whether they are pillars of iron bolting the doors shut, as Atiyah al-Awfi said, or pillars of fire forming the walls of the prison, as al-Sudi said, or chains binding the condemned to columns that reach endlessly upward, as Ibn Abbas suggested, their function is singular. They make the closure permanent. They extend the sealing into eternity. They take the word Musadah and give it physical infrastructure that the mind can almost touch. And here is where the surah's deepest secret lives. Here is what 3 previous examinations of these verses explored from every angle of human behavior and moral reckoning, but what no examination has yet named, from the angle of language itself. This surah is not a warning delivered in words. This surah is an act of construction performed through words. When Allah said al-Hutamah, a fire came into linguistic existence that had not existed before. When He said Musadah, a sealed door materialized in the architecture of meaning. When He said Amadin Mumaddada, pillars rose in the imagination of every listener who would ever hear these verses until the day of judgment. The surah does not describe a prison, it builds one. Verse by verse, word by invented word, the walls go up, the fire is kindled, the door is sealed, and the pillars extend, and the building material is language, not stone, not iron. Language that did not exist until God spoke it. This is what separates divine speech from every other form of communication. Human speech responds to reality. Divine speech creates it. A poet describes a fire he has seen. Allah speaks a fire into existence. A human author names a place that already exists on a map. Allah names a place, and the name itself becomes the first brick of its construction. The 33 words of this surah are not a report sent back from a reality that was already there. They are the blueprint. They are the foundation. They are the act of building itself, performed not with hands, but with syllables, not with tools, but with grammar, not with material, but with the raw, uncontainable power of divine speech. And this is why the surah should terrify you in a way that has nothing to do with fire and everything to do with who is speaking. Because the one who spoke these words is the same one who said kun fayakun, be and it is. The one whose speech does not describe existing realities, but generates new ones. The one who said, let there be light, and light existed. The one who said to the heavens and the earth, come willingly or unwillingly, and they said, we come willingly. The one whose every word is an act of creation. And this creator, this author of existence itself, looked down at a man who mocked the weak and counted his gold and believed himself permanent, and he did not respond with existing language. He found existing language insufficient. He found the entire Arabic vocabulary, the richest language his creation had produced, inadequate to contain what he needed to say. So he made new words. He forged new grammatical structures. He invented forms that the greatest linguists in history would spend their lives trying to fully understand. He did this for 33 words about a man who whispered insults at dinner gatherings. Let that sink into you. Let the scale of that response reach whatever part of you still thinks that the way you speak about other people is a small matter. The creator of the Arabic language could not find existing Arabic sufficient to address this sin. He had to expand the language. He had to give it new bones, new nerves, new capacity. He had to author vocabulary that had never existed in order to adequately respond to what happens when a human being with wealth decides that another human being without it deserves to be diminished. That is not a footnote in the history of revelation. That is the single clearest indicator of how seriously Allah takes the destruction of human dignity, serious enough to build new language for it. Serious enough to mint new words, serious enough to break the established conventions of Arabic grammar, serious enough to compose, in 33 words, a surah that contains more linguistic innovation per syllable than almost any other passage in the Quran. And the surah is still being recited, every day, in every time zone, on every continent. The words that Allah invented to respond to a specific cruelty in 7th century Makkah are spoken aloud in Salah, in study circles, in the quiet hours before Fajr, when a believer opens the Mushaf and reads by the light of a single lamp. And every time those words are spoken, the construction continues. The fire remains kindled. The door remains sealed. The pillars remain extended. Because divine speech does not expire. It does not become historical. It does not fade into metaphor. It remains as active, as generative, as creatively alive as the moment it was first spoken. You are not reading a record of something God once said. You are standing in the presence of speech that is still building what it described. And the question the surah leaves you with is not about fire or punishment or sealed doors. The question is about the one who is speaking. If he needed to create new language to address the sin of mocking another human being, if the weight of that sin was so immense that the entire existing vocabulary of the most expressive language on earth could not hold it, then what does that tell you about the value he places on the person who was mocked? What does that tell you about how he sees the believer who was laughed at, the poor man who was dismissed, the woman whose dignity was shredded in a gathering she never even knew about? It tells you that their worth, in the eyes of the one who authors language and builds worlds with words, was so immense that when it was violated, even the Arabic language had to be expanded to carry the weight of his response. 33 words, 7 that exist nowhere else, 60 new features introduced to a language that was already the richest on earth. All because someone thought they could mock a believer and walk away unchanged. The words have been spoken, the construction is complete, and somewhere in the architecture of the unseen, al-Hutamah stands, built not from stone or fire alone, but from the very syllables that named it, waiting with the patience of a sunrise for the hearts it was designed to find. The only question is whether your heart, right now, in this moment, recognizes itself in these 33 words, not as the victim, not as the spectator, but as someone who has been addressed by a God who creates new language when old language is not enough. He spoke these words once. They have never stopped echoing, and they will not stop until the pillars themselves are no longer needed. That is what it means when God speaks. And He has spoken.